Hi guys, it's Kelly and I am back again with another video. Today's video is for Waffle Flower's new January 2020 release. This is the Blossom set and then the oversized Loved You die. This is actually a bundle. Before we get into that, let's talk about this engagement ring. We're not really going to talk about it. I'm just going to show it to you so that everybody can stop asking to see it. I apologize that earlier I did not, like in previous videos, I didn't take the time to show you. I didn't really think it was that big of a deal, but apparently there are a bunch of you who would really like to see it. So now you have, and we can go from there. So the bundle set. So the Blossoms stamp set, dies, and then this oversized Loved You is actually a bundle that's available on Waffle Flower's website. And it does give you a little bit of a discount. So just something to keep in mind. This video is part of a blog hop. If you would like to be part of that and the giveaways that are available, there'll be a link below to my blog if you're watching on YouTube. So I am working on Canson watercolor paper. I use the Monteval Aquarelle one just because that's my preference. But if you have a watercolor paper that you like, use that. I am stamping this just on the top portion of my card after using my embossing bag, the anti-static bag, and then I'm going to heat set it in white. I had, funny how things work out. I originally had a different intention for how I was going to do this. The background was going to be the same, and then I was going to, well, I did actually color it with Copic markers, but in between of the making of the background and the coloring of the Copic markers, Eric actually came home from work, and so I paused it to talk to him. And then once I was done talking to him, apparently I never unpaused it. So like I was done coloring, but then none of it was recorded. So meh, it was what it was. For the background, I chose to use Tattered Rose, Picked Raspberry, and Abandoned Coral. So I don't know if it happens to anybody else, but it certainly happens to me. These are oxides, by the way, Distress Oxides. I wanted the background to be real soft. But like when I was looking at the stamp sets, like in my head, trying to come up with my card design, it was like a peachy coral color. And like, that's just how I envisioned it. So once that happens to me, and it doesn't happen for every stamp set or every card, but once it does happen to me, I pretty much can't see it any other way. Like my brain won't, I don't know, until this one is made, I cannot come up with any other ideas. So in order to have it be that like peachy, pinky coral color, I pulled out a bunch of different colors of Distress Oxides and Distress Inks and kind of looked to see what I could do. The Abandoned Coral obviously is a coral color, but it does tend to be a bit more red. So that's why I'm mixing it with the Picked Raspberry. That gives me the coral color that I envisioned. So I'm still having lighting issues. I don't know why. The settings aren't any different, and I cannot figure out why it keeps, if I'm not actively working on screen, like the times where I'm transferring out different colors, you can see it starts to get like a yellow cast to it, and then once I'm back in there, it goes back to a true white. So thankfully we are in the day and age of which you can just download the manuals online. So I have done that now, since I have no idea. I mean, I've had this camera for almost 7 years, and so I really, between two moves, I have no idea where my manual is. And so I'm going to look at the online manual and see if I can figure out what the deal is. So here, after my Distress ink or the oxide inking is done, I'm just buffing off the extra color that's sitting on top of my embossing with just like a slightly damp cloth. Just to get that out of there. I am going to, go back to one of my huge loves, which is the Perfect Pearls. Going to mix that with some water and then just spatter it on the background to kind of break up that color. I didn't do any like just regular clean, clear water this time. I just did the Perfect Pearls. And then originally, so this is like the first piece. Then I started talking to Eric, and then I ended up having to make it all over, make it all over again. And when I did it the second time, because I didn't love it the first time, I decided that I was going to watercolor with regular distress inks. So it's the same colors with the addition of the hickory smoke. And then I'm just going to add color in this way. It still ended up being super soft. And I don't know how I feel. I think that it's pretty. It's hard for me because I do like contrast and bolder colors. This one doesn't have a lot of it in the background, and actually the sentiment ends up being the star of the show, which that's not a bad thing. It's just, for me, unusual if I have a floral stamp set that it's not the focal point. But I don't really know if if I could have avoided it with the sentiment being this large, which I love. I think the sentiment's beautiful. I love the script. So, I mean, it's okay. It's just different for me. So anyway, what has been going on? Oh, no, let's talk about the watercoloring, and then we'll talk about what's been going on. So for the watercolor, basically, I put down the Tattered Rose. I just filled in everything with it. If you're doing a more controlled watercolor, you won't want to work into what areas that are next to each other because the colors will bleed in. But mine was really just a very simple kind of dropping in a couple of colors to make it a little bit bolder. So I just worked in the same order, the lightest to darkest, from the Tattered Rose to the Picked Raspberry to the Abandoned Coral, and added those in to an already, it's wet on wet, so it was already, the petal was already wet, and then I just added in the colors. If it started to dry, where I only really had one or two petals that did that, I just went back in with the Tattered Rose and added it on the edges, so that everything stayed at least wet enough for me to be able to add pigment to. And then pretty much it's a really monochromatic card, because everything's kind of the same. As like, I used all the same colors. So some of the flowers I just used like Picked Raspberry, and some of them I just used Abandoned Coral, but everything in the background's pretty much just those three colors. And watercolors always dry back lighter than what you're putting them on, so just keep that in mind as you're working. At some point I am going to speed this up a little bit, just because, you know, it's the same thing. Wet it, drop in color, move on to the next. So as far as like what's been happening, still working quite a bit. Obviously paying for this wedding ourselves. We're trying to put away as much as we can. Somebody had recently, and honestly, I completely forgot that I didn't even share this. Somebody had recently asked me on Instagram, like, hey, did you ever get that job? So if you followed me on Instagram, then you know that forever ago, I had actually gone for an interview. So a lot of you guys associate me with 911, police, fire, EMS dispatching, which I did for a really, really long time. But about, I don't know, 5 years ago, my job actually switched. So I still work for the police department, and I still am involved with the everyday workings, but I am not on the radio anymore. My department regionalized, and we all lost our jobs. And then they ended up keeping some people full time. My old chief asked me if I would come back. I had left and gone to actually the State Highway Patrol, and he asked me if I would come back to this department. But I always missed dispatching. I missed being on the radio. My current job is necessary for the police department to function, but it is not, it's not super fun, or I don't feel like I'm helping people. So it's not, I don't love it like I love dispatching. And so I've always kind of dispatched somewhere else, which is why I have, just this endless amount of jobs. Um, so once I went to a regional center for a little while, and that it was just toxic. Like the environment was just toxic, and so I ended up leaving there. And then I interviewed for an in-house dispatch, which I loved. Loved those people, loved that department. They actual so when I went for the interview, this is not my current interview, this is an old interview. When I had gone for the interview, they told me they were looking for someone to work 24 hours in a week, and I was like, lovely to meet you, don't want to waste your time, I'm not your girl. Like, I have a full-time job, I have a child, I have my own business. I don't, like, I can't give you 24 hours a week. And then the next day they called and offered me the job, and I was like, I don't want you to feel like you're not getting any return on your investment. And the dispatch supervisor was like, no, we're playing the long game here in the hopes that you'll come here full time at some point. Back to the card. So I wanted to do a ombre for the sentiment. Because this is such a large sentiment, I just decided to do a full sheet. It's 8.5 by 4.25, and I would recommend that you do the same thing because it decreases the chance of you bending any of those letters if you're doing a single solitary die cut. Now, I will tell you that the oxides end up not being it for me, so I am going to go back in with the distress inks and add more rich color to them. So I do end up doing the die cut, and I didn't have any issues, but I know it can be an issue. So just keep that in mind when you're heading into adding the color to your die cut. And eventually, like, you'll see I'm using all of these here, and then I'm going to add in the hickory smoke just to create some contrast. Eventually, once I go through with the distress inks, I'm going to cut out that tattered rose because it just didn't have enough contrast, being as how it was a very monochromatic card. It was not standing out enough for me. So anyway, they called and offered me the job. We're playing the long game in the hopes that you'll come here. And honestly, those people did offer me a full-time job 3 different times, and 3 different times I turned them down because my new job, it was new 5 years ago. This position does give me more freedom than working the radio. I have holidays off. I can take, my vacation time, my comp time, and not have to worry about coverage. Whereas working the radio, there always has to be somebody on. It can't be left vacant. So if there is nobody to cover, then you have to go into work. And if somebody calls off sick, then you have to stay. And I did that for, 11 years. And so with having Peanut be younger, I didn't want to have to work if I couldn't work or if he had something going on. Whereas this position, if I need to leave early because he has something going on at school, I can, and nobody cares. So I'm very blessed to be able to do that. So I did go work for that department, loved them, but eventually they started losing full-time employees. Full-timers started jumping ship, and so they needed more coverage than I could provide. And eventually it just came to a head where they were like, we need you to work more hours. And I was like, I can't. And so there wasn't any, it didn't end on a bad note. There wasn't any bitterness. I would still go back and work for them. They were lovely. And in fact, they did it was not like a touch a truck. They did a community event. And we took Peanut up there, Eric and I took Peanut up there, and as soon as I was walking toward the table, all the girls were like, when are you coming back? And they were lovely. And I would go back there, but it's not feasible with my current schedule. So back in, they called me when we were on vacation, so it had to be maybe the beginning of July. There was another department, and they are a regional center, but they were hiring, and I missed dispatch because it had been about a year and a half since I had dispatched at all. And so I went ahead and applied. Their background, which I've been through 2 polygraphs, 2 It's called a CVSA. It's a voice stress analysis. But theirs was very rigorous and it took a very long time. So the original position was for a full-time job. After Eric and I talked, we with him, possibly he had put in for the detective bureau. We didn't really know what his schedule was going to be. We decided that as a family, our better bet was me going there part-time. And then eventually, if it works out and I want to go full-time, it'll be an option. But right now, part-time would be a better fit. And so I went through the whole process, and they were like, we want to offer you a part-time job. And I was like, fantastic, because that's exactly what I'm looking for. So now this is my fourth job, and I know how that sounds. Like, when are you home? When do you sleep? How do you accomplish anything? Basically, I grocery shop online. No, really, I grocery shop online. It's a godsend, and I am so grateful to have those like 3 hours back in my life. But so they're very flexible with their part-time hours, which is one of the reasons why it will work out so well. So I don't have to work a minimum number of hours in a week. I don't have to work a specific shift. So I did have my first day, like I call it my paperwork day, where you just go in and take care of all the paperwork. I did do that at the beginning of December, and then I really have not worked since then, because right after that, Peanut went on Christmas break, and the majority of the hours that I can work for them are while he is at school. So I'm excited to go back to dispatching. I got to get through the training portion of it, because even though I've been doing this for a super long time, I know how to dispatch for my department. I do not know how to dispatch for their department. Everybody does it a little bit differently. So I adhered, you can see like when I did the stacking of the sentiments, I adhered the white slightly off center. That's going to break it up from the background a little bit, since everything is so monochromatic. I added some rhinestones, and then I'm going to put some clear glitter over top of my Love You. And then, but just be aware, because oxides and distress inks, distress oxides are reactivated with water or moisture. So if you decide to do the white drop shadow, you can contaminate it. You will reactivate the ink with the glitter pen. So that's it. That's the whole card. If you'd like to take part in the blog hop and the prizes that are available, again, it will be linked below. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.